Listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of APA and Chair of the APA New Urbanism Division, and I'm your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, May 12th, and we will be hearing the presentation, The Next Disruptive Technology, Autonomous Vehicles. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call that 1-800 number that's bold on your screen. And for your content questions related to the presentation, you can type those in the questions box, again located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen, and we'll be answering those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up on your screen is a list of our 2017 sponsoring chapters and divisions. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to their members. If you're looking down the list and you don't see your chapter or division listed, we ask that you please reach out to them and suggest that they join us. Today's webcast in particular is sponsored by the Ohio chapter, and you can learn more about the Ohio chapter by visiting ohioplanning.org. On your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts. We have a full docket this summer. To register for these, you can visit our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, just head over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and then you can search for CM activities. You can either search by today's title or the event number, both of which are found on our webcast webpage. Again, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And this webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. We do have some recorded webcasts that are available for distance education, and you can check on those again on our webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive the most up-to-date information when anything changes with any of our sessions. And we are recording today's webcast. It will be available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube and we'll pop up. And a PDF of the PowerPoint will also be available after the session on our webcast webpage. Again, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. With that, I am done with housekeeping items and we'll be turning it over now to today's panelists. Justin.
Great, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Thanks for the intro. We are excited to be here today to talk about what we think is the next true revolution in the way that city planning is going to proceed over the next very few years and then certainly over the next decades. We're going to introduce ourselves very quickly here. Next slide, if you would, Justin. I'm Jason Sudi, and I'm a principal with OHM Advisors. And along with these two gentlemen who will be presenting with me today, we've formed something called the Urban Mobility Research Center, which is sort of a early stages organization to look at a lot of factors of urban mobility and centered around how things are really going to fundamentally change with regard to autonomous vehicles. I have about 20 years of experience working in the private sector, but almost all for municipal and public clients. And then I'm also an auxiliary faculty member for about 12 years at The Ohio State University.
My name is Justin Robbins, Senior Planner at OHM Advisors. I've been with the company for about 5 years with a background in architecture as well as planning. This subject that we're about to present on today, I think, is one of the more exciting things that's going to happen in the field of planning and probably our entire generation. So it's something that we're really looking forward to talking to you all about, and hopefully you leave today with a better understanding about what we're going to be dealing with as planners over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
And finally, I'm Rick Stein. I am the founder and principal of Urban Decision Group. We're an urban planning firm based in Columbus, Ohio. I've been doing planning for roughly 10 years, and prior to that, I did software development exclusively for about 15 years. So I've managed to parlay both of those passions into a fairly interesting career, and it's led me to this.
So one of the things we want to do to start, I know there's been, I'm sure with many of you likely having attended New York last week and other sessions, there's been a lot of talk about what this means to us as far as the technical aspects and the specific aspects of life that may change with autonomous vehicles. I just want to walk you through thinking about a couple different scenarios that we're going to now experience as we go forward, and then we're going to put a lot of technical information behind this. So, you know, some of these folks you may be familiar to you, or maybe your kids that you're thinking of, your parents, or maybe where you'll be, not today, but some years from now. First of all, young and urban contingent. Think about what their lifestyle might be like that's even a little bit different than what it is today. There's a pretty good chance that anyone who's born now is unlikely to end up having to get a driver's license, which is a really weird concept for all of us that sort of we're striving to turn 16 to get a license for mobility and the opportunity to have a different kind of lifestyle. A lot of these folks are not going to need cars. So it's not just going to be the major metropolitan centers that no longer drive cars, it's going to be all over the country. So a typical young person in an urban area, or even an older person in an urban area, you know, wake up in the morning and just hit a button on what's likely to be a shared service that we'll talk about here in a little while. That will be an economic decision that allows them to have a lot more mobility without sacrificing some of the other things they may be interested in life. Some estimates are showing that it could be as low as 30 cents on the dollar as compared to current operations of vehicles, and that's a pretty dramatic way to drive people toward a different type of technology. And this makes really far, far denser atmospheres and far denser development much easier, and will continue to attract folks that want to live in those type of environments. And again, we're going to talk through how that's all possible by investigating some sites. Think about suburban families. Right now, a typical suburban family has a couple of cars. As I think most of us being planners are aware, our cars are sitting idle 95% of the time. And in many cases, in many cities, in many regions, we have as many or more cars than we actually have licensed drivers, because we just have so many vehicles in excess based on the lifestyles that we have. So think about a suburban family. This autonomous vehicle technology doesn't necessarily mean everyone's going to live in a dense urban environment. It also will change the way that people function in the suburbs. Maybe instead of having 2 cars or 3 cars, all of a sudden you'll have 1 car. You may own your own autonomous vehicle for a time. Think about how many times you are racing out right after work to get your kid to a soccer practice, or getting up extra early because your kids go to different directions in the morning. Maybe they're not bused where you live. Well, in the future, not in the very distant future, maybe you'll wake up and your kids will about to be leaving on different autonomous vehicles that will go in opposite directions. After work, you won't have to leave. They can be picked up and they can be dropped off at whatever practice it is that they need to attend. And in fact, what we're going to also talk about is the very nature of the way retail is changing. You probably won't be running home to grab groceries or to grab specific items that you need, because a lot of those will already be being delivered to your house. So it's going to kind of fundamentally change the way that we think about how we live and where we live. And the question for us as planners is, what does that mean for development patterns? How are people going to choose where they live differently based on how they get there and what they have once they arrive? Think of older populations. There's a huge opportunity for older populations and frankly, other folks that can't drive, disabled populations. People that probably shouldn't still be driving. I know my grandparents lived well into their 90s, and while my grandmother stopped driving, it was a little nerve-wracking for us that my grandfather kept driving, and his range just kept shrinking and shrinking. This will allow people who are in older population or disabled or have some other factor that prohibits their mobility to pretty much wipe that away. You will be able to move about wherever you want to go, and that will have a huge implication for location decisions on where to live. A lot of times now, seniors will move to locations where it's easier for them to walk or take a transit line. Well, that transit system may fundamentally change. It very well may be a system where you easily hit a button from no matter where you are and can have access, ideally keeping people more linked to their families, to the activity centers that are in their neighborhoods, and the other things that they can do, such as outdoor recreation. Hopefully helping people retain mental and physical acuity even into later life. So again, these are just some general scenarios just to start to get you thinking of, hey, where am I going to be in my life 3, 5, 10, 15, and 20 years from now? Because all of these factors are going to just completely change some of the fundamental ways that we make decisions right now about our world.
Really what today is about, we want you guys to look beyond the technology itself, and we want to start thinking about how this is going to affect us as planners and the communities that we serve. So what we're really doing is nearing the end of a 70-year experiment as it's been put. We've had a very consistent development pattern over the course of that time period that's really been based around the automobile, and the widespread adoption of autonomous technology now has the ability to upend a lot of what we've been doing over the course of that time. We need to be ready. Within this realm, there's going to be winners and losers. There's going to be cities that are able to embrace the technology and really make it their own, and there's going to be cities that probably try to stop it as much as possible, and that might be to their detriment. Cities are going to have a lot to gain. They have to be prepared, and they have to embrace change. But what we have to understand is this technology is part of a global shift. This is not something that you can stop. It's something that is going to happen. There's no doubt about that, I think, in anybody's mind that's been working in the field for any significant amount of time. Every auto manufacturer is in the process now of developing their own autonomous brand, sometimes with the help of ride-sharing services and whatnot. But again, this is part of a larger trend that we're seeing worldwide. Some of the impacts that we're going to talk about today, and we want to discuss a little bit about some of the indicators that you might want to look at in terms of the impacts you're going to see from autonomous vehicles. This is what you'll pretty much be looking at in terms of typical suburban style design and development. This is a pattern that we've seen countrywide, and we're going to show some examples of that today. Overparked, a lot of surface lots, big box and strip malls, has a high quantity of retail, and anybody that's paid attention as of late knows that retail is, at least on the brick and mortar side, in jeopardy in a lot of ways. And while this technology is not really addressing that per se, it's still something that's going to have an enormous consequence on those areas. Yeah. It's going to be another nail in the coffin to some extent in some of the development patterns that we've had built over the past 70 years.
And Rick's going to talk about how some of these factors play into his later analysis, but really these next couple slides are things that should alert you. If this is your community, these are the things that are really going to be impacted most significantly. Not that everything in life won't be significantly impacted in the built environment by autonomous vehicles, but these are the bellwethers that will probably be impacted the most and first, and that plays into Rick's analysis.
And I think it's difficult to overstate the impact that this is going to have on retail because these two things are converging. The fact that we were overbuilt by as much as 50% in retail and autonomous technology is coming online quickly. It's going to result in a lot of tremendous and significant redevelopment opportunities. There are an awful lot of jobs that have high automation factors. So it's the same technology that allows for autonomous vehicles is built into robotics and the automating of a lot of service jobs, transportation jobs, manufacturing jobs, agriculture. I mean, that's really just the tip of the iceberg. And quite frankly, if you study computing, there's a lot of thought leaders that believe there's literally almost every job could eventually be automated.
What's important to think of as the technology starts to become more and more commonplace, it's really difficult for us as planners to understand exactly where it's going to go, but we know it's going to happen. We know that there's decisions that can be made as a community that are probably not the best decisions, and what we want to do is to make sure that as you make those decisions, you're doing so with the understanding that this is coming into the future. And we want to make sure that as you spend money, as you start to prioritize budgets, you're not making public investments that are going to be vulnerable to the technology, such as parking decks that are unable to be transformed into another use. This is an example of one. It's actually right up the street from our office that uses a helix structure. So the floor plates probably don't have the correct floor-to-ceiling height. They're at an angle, so it's going to be really, really difficult to turn that into another use besides a parking garage. So again, keep these things in mind as these questions start to arise within your community, because it's something that, again, is going to be affecting all of us in a very short amount of time. The other issue that we have is there's a lot of places that are not really places. There's a lot of places that have gone to such an extent to accommodate automobiles that they lose their sense of place altogether. I'm sure everybody on the webinar and on the line knows a lot of examples of these types of places, and these are the ones that are going to be probably the most vulnerable as the technology progresses. Ease of access is going to be less vital, so a lot of the businesses are going to become obsolete. Basic rules of development are no longer going to apply, like you have to have high visibility along the freeway, you have to have excellent access. The technology is going to address a lot of these problems in car, and it's really going to fundamentally change how we understand development patterns within the country.
One thing I want you to think about is how many of you have communities where you have prime intersections, and on those intersections you have a list of uses that include gas stations, car lots, some other auto-oriented service facility, car rental agencies. There are reports now where it is predicted all of those businesses will become completely obsolete. And you can say, well, you know, a gas station will just turn into a charging station. Maybe to a certain extent. It's much more likely that the way that future vehicles will work will be fueled and charged by electricity in ways that are more convenient than having to seek out a specific spot, which right now are the prime spots in some of our development areas. So just think about if your community has a corridor or a four-corner intersection that's prime real estate under today's rules, and all of those businesses may become obsolete within a relatively short time frame. We used to think, wow, there's a gas station there, there's a used car lot there, there's a whatever. That is going to be there for the next decades. Well, they may be all going away. So now it's our time to think about what to do.
Let's take a look at the current trends, what's going along right now in the technology and what's happening in the planning world that are really going to affect how things progress. Safety is a big issue. We talk about the drivers of autonomous technology, and safety is going to be the one that really drives things forward a lot. These cars are going to be tremendously safe, much more so than our current situation. Right now, about 94% of our traffic accidents and fatalities are caused by human error. So if you just look at the deaths that occur on a yearly basis within the United States, it's a massive loss of life per year just getting to and from places. And if there's any doubt in anyone's mind that there's going to be significant pressures, this is probably going to be the most. And I know Rick is probably wanting to bring it up as well, but even in terms of insurance, why would you carry liability insurance driving a car yourself when you could rid yourself of all liability in terms of getting from place to place at a much cheaper price, at a much more efficient means to get there?
So we actually think something as sexy as insurance and liability might be the thing that propels this forward the fastest. Google's gone on record as saying that if you are in a Google car, they are 100% liable for what takes place in an automated Google car. So think about that for a second. If the automator is liable versus the human driver, that's a pretty compelling argument to let go of the wheel. It may seem a little abstract now, but what if the threat of an accident or the threat of litigation? What if you could just make that disappear by utilizing autonomy? I mean, it's a pretty compelling argument, and the insurance topic actually came up at a Ford event that we recently attended back in January, and that's what they're thinking. They think the technology will be here. Ultimately, it'll be something like insurance that actually pushes this forward.
The other thing is there's trends. There's different things that are happening within our society that are leading people to drive less in general. A lot of the folks that I look at in the younger generations, and we're all aware, they have different priorities. And not the case anymore where when you turn 16, you want to get your license as soon as possible. Driving right now for the younger generations is not as critical because they have that path to communication other than face-to-face contact.
And that's not just anecdotal. We're actually seeing the lowest number of drivers when they turn 16 getting their licenses since they started keeping track of that stat many decades ago. So what we're seeing, as we see in this picture, where a lot of folks are on their phones. One of the reasons why the fatality numbers are going up so dramatically, well, people think the main reason is distracted driving. It's not really a change in all the other danger factors, and there are some more lane miles being driven, so that has some impact on it. But really, this distracted driving is a kind of a fundamental aspect of technology, and so we're looking at a different technology to hopefully change some of the difficulties that we're creating because of ourselves.
If this is an S curve, and this S curve represents smartphone adoption over the years. And as you can see, back in 2007 at the launch of the iPhone, relatively small adoption. It was just relegated primarily to the BlackBerry. Remember the BlackBerry? Okay. You can see an S-curve accelerates rather quickly. In this example, it's accelerating primarily due to the reduction of the cost of the materials that go into a smartphone. So as those costs decreased, you saw wider spread cell phone or smartphone adoption. That also coincided with infrastructure improvements that the carriers were able to make at the same time. We think the adoption of autonomy or autonomous vehicles will be similar to this. As a matter of fact, there was an article that we just read this past week that all but confirmed this same hypothesis. So right now we would be in the beginning stages. So the iPhone, actually we're probably back in the BlackBerry territory right now with respect to autonomy. But as these costs decrease, they will slowly be introduced to your car, one feature at a time, until one day you'll wake up and cars have 3 or 4 autonomy-based features, and that effectively is full autonomy. So it's somewhat of a slow walk at the beginning, but these costs will decrease tremendously here in the future. As a matter of fact, we've had a technology called LiDAR that is it's central to autonomy at the moment, and the costs of LiDAR are just coming crashing to earth, and that's one of the things we think is going to accelerate it here in the not so distant future.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is one of the graphs that's really important for people to really comprehend. And this is, I think, one of the stumbling blocks that people have in terms of understanding how quickly this can happen. Right now, we're basically at, as Rick said, the BlackBerry portion. We're at the Motorola StarTAC flip phone of autonomous cars. Looking backwards, you're going to see a straight trend line. Looking forward, people are going to think that trend line continues on as a straight line, but it doesn't. It accelerates exponentially, and that's a really important concept to understand. It's not the fact that looking backwards is going to give you an accurate indication of where the technology is going. You really have to look forward and look how technology gets adopted and how technology quickens the pace of transistor speed and whatnot in order to get these things to happen. So this is a really important concept.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, when I was interrupting Justin there for a second, I want to make sure that you understand that our process has been to be conservative, and Rick can explain where he put in his estimates as he went. Everything we're seeing, from the real world implementation to the increase in technological processing speed, to the drop in prices of things like LiDAR, to the report after report that are coming out by respected national and international research institutions. We were wrong, but not on the side we thought we would be. We thought we were being too aggressive and kept pulling it back because we were worried that we were just thinking this was going to happen too quickly. All indications are this is going to happen way more quickly than any of us ever anticipated. And I'll let Rick talk about that. I don't want to steal his thunder. But the one thing to think about is that these are on the road right this minute.
There was an article in the New York Times just a few days ago, and it was Thomas Friedman, the economist, and he was speaking with the director of Intel, and they were talking about the speed of transistor chips. In 2014, they had a chip with 3.7 million transistors per square millimeter. In 2017, 3 years later, they have a chip with 100 million transistors per millimeter, and that's with better energy efficiency and less heat. That's a very short amount of time to more than double the processing power in the same area. And this, again, is a good example of how technology progresses. These chips are going to be a foundation when you have a car that has to understand 360 degrees the difference between a mailbox and a dog and a road stripe and another car and a pedestrian. These things had to happen in a split second. And now the technology is really at the point in terms of processing speed where this is a reality. This is something that is no longer in the realm of questionable technology. This is going to happen.
And I want to say just real quickly, because we kind of sped through what's out there now, being an audience that we think is pretty informed of this kind of thing, we didn't go into all these specific elements, but just in case anyone's not aware, there are over a dozen companies right now testing fully autonomous vehicles throughout the country, and that includes in Pittsburgh and in Phoenix and soon to be several other cities, Uber fleets that are operating completely autonomously, and then we're going to show you some videos of other companies that are working in that space.
This is an example of a Tesla right now. This technology is being sold on the cars. The update and the software is not available right now for the average consumer. But it's a really important thing to understand is that this car, as you watch the driver, he's not going to touch the wheel at all. He's not going to touch the brake or the accelerator. This video is sped up, but he goes through a number of different environments, including the urban environment that you see here. And you can see how the car is actually understanding the environment. So the screens to the right are the different camera angles that it has. It's understanding road lines. It's understanding trajectory of the different objects coming into its field of view and its path of motion. It's understanding how to navigate. It has a situational awareness of the world and is able to react to it. And that's really what the crowning achievement is of one of these cars, is the ability to react to a world that is a little bit planned, but by far and large, it's unknown. You never know what's going to happen, or every time it turns a corner, what's going to be there, and the car has to be able to determine what course of action it's going to take.
And one of the key takeaways from this video is this is with no infrastructure changes whatsoever. This is with the built environment as it currently exists. The technology is solely in the car, and it's only in this car. So we haven't even factored in things like vehicle to infrastructure technology and vehicle to vehicle technology, which will be instrumental in the widespread adoption of this. But this is what we're capable of doing today.
I do have to apologize to the audience as well. This is actually set to Rolling Stone's Paint It Black. Unfortunately, it's on mute, so you all miss out on that wonderful song. So I'm going to speed this along a little bit, but you get the idea. These videos are available online for anybody who wants to look at them. It's pretty incredible, and it's one of those things, as you watch it, it's pretty breathtaking how far the technology is. And again, this is the Motorola StarTAC flip phone of the autonomous car world. It's only going to get faster, and it's going to do it at an ever increasingly fast basis. So how's it going to change? What's going to change? It's going to be fundamental impacts for land use development, infrastructure, as life as we know it. Transportation and land use are something that are intrinsically linked. And as the transportation technology changes, our land use patterns are going to change really fundamentally. And we explored a little bit how that's going to happen. So right now, typically when we do the presentation, we have a back and forth with the planners, and I always scold them if they don't know any of these things, but we're going to have a little bit of a planning refresher in terms of some of the numbers that we're going to be dealing with. So the average size of a parking space, 9 by 18 or 10 by 20, which is plus or minus 200 square feet. How many parking spaces do you think you can get per acre of land? Well, efficiently parked, you're looking at about 100 spaces. So 100 spaces per acre. If we look at how many parking spaces you would need for about 1,000 square feet of retail, we're right now based out of Columbus, Ohio. So again, you're looking at 3 to 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet, or approximately 1,740 square feet of parking or impervious surface area. You'll notice those two numbers are fairly different. 1,000 square feet of usable building area that people are actually inside. It's creating value. It's providing a place for jobs. You're providing infrastructure to it, versus the 1,740 that really creates no value. It's somewhere to put your car and to get to your car. You have to put infrastructure past it. And really what you have to understand is as cars were introduced into the development pattern, it really stretched that pattern out. It changed the scale fundamentally about how we build our spaces and build our cities. How many square feet an acre? I think everybody should know this, 42,560. And given 1 acre of land, how much retail do you think can be developed? Well, the answer is about 10,000 square feet. That's what we would consider for auto-oriented development a pretty good number to hit. Well, what this means is parking is the #1 constraint for development in almost any context. And there's a couple of outliers. Obviously, New York City has a robust fixed asset transportation system, so these numbers are not going to apply. But for anybody that's worked in the development field or worked in the planning field over the past 70 years, these are numbers that are going to be pretty familiar. Again, parking is the driver. Parking is something that you always have to accommodate. It's the way that people get to and from these places. What we did is look at how parking can actually affect a site and how it can affect development on that site. So we have kind of a dummy site here. This is a 14-acre site. It's parked on the left-hand side. We have a building that's office parked at 1 to 300 at 3 stories, and then we have retail parked at 1 to 200. And you can see that of that area, of that 14-acre site, you're looking at 6.6 acres of parking, and you're getting about 135,000 square feet of building area. So what we're going to do is go through different levels of autonomy and show how that parking area could change and how the building siding on the site could actually change as well with it. So as we go, we have 10% autonomy. You can see the parking reduced, and we get into some unused land, so a half an acre of that. I'm going to flip through these real quick without describing because you guys can see all the numbers. Go from 20% up to 30%, 40%, 50%. What's really exciting here is that all of a sudden, of that 6 acres of parking, you're now having 3 acres that are unused. So it's a pretty good split. 60%, 70, 80, and we get to 90. And this is where it gets kind of fun. So of that 90%, when you reach autonomy of that 14-acre site, about 6 of that is going to be unused now. I'm not saying the buildings move, but it's just showing how those buildings can now be much denser within a site and how much land is potentially unused.
And you may be saying, well, you know, how all of a sudden is this all available? We're going to talk about here in a little while that there's going to be some shift in the way people are fundamentally utilizing vehicles, having vehicles, and having a need for parking. Because once your vehicle no longer has to sit still for 95% of the time or follow you around, that means that vehicle can leave. That means you may not even own the vehicle, and you may be sharing that with a number of other users. You may own it, and it may leave and make money for you when it's not driving you around in some sort of shared environment. So what we've done is taken a fairly conservative approach to estimating how much the parking demand would reduce with certain levels of autonomy, and then as you can see, this is the resulting opportunity development cost.
What gets really exciting is past 90, all of a sudden you can start adding, I mean, you can do this throughout the process, but here's what something could happen is you have now 220,000 square feet of building. Now you have 444,000. Now you have 740,000. Up to infinite, basically. It's the cost of the architecture now that matters, and not necessarily the balance of square feet with parking once you take parking out of the equation. And for planners, this is a really important thing to understand, is no longer are we constrained to parking with development on a site. What that does is for areas that have large amounts of auto-oriented development, those places are going to be fundamentally disadvantaged in a lot of ways because they don't have that sense of place. There's going to be a lot of land that's underutilized. And what happens all of a sudden when you dump a large amount of land that's now developable to any extent onto an open market? There's going to be some pretty significant changes in terms of price per square foot in building, leasing rates, property values. All these things are things that we have to consider as planners. We took a look at an area. This is outside Columbus. This is a community called Worthington, just to the north of Columbus. It's a site of 350 acres that has a number of uses, and this is why we chose it. It has office, residential, hotel, restaurant, and theater. Typical highway development. This is not brand new. This has been around for probably about 20 years now, with a number of changes happening over the course of the span of the development. Took a look at how that land is actually used, and what we're trying to do is get a feel for the scale of some of the I don't want to say problems that we've created, but some of the development patterns that we've created that are going to cause us some problems. So of that area, of that 350 acres, about 4% of that is roadway, 14 acres. We look at the building. We have 31.5 acres, or 9%. That equals to about 3.1 million square feet of buildable area when you calculate out the floor plates up. We get to the green space. 32% of the site, or 112 acres of that 350, is green space. This is a big one. 55% of that 350 acres is parking, 192 acres. Now let that number sink in for a little bit. If you're somebody that's developing land and you buy 350 acres, you're dedicating over half of that to car storage, so something that has no intrinsic value besides getting to and from the land uses that actually provide value. This is something that I think is really important that we think about as a profession. How do you deal with this? How do you deal with land use patterns like this that may be completely obsolete within the course of 10 to 15 years? These are big problems. These are problems that we don't necessarily have the answer for right now, but are continuing to ask the question as time goes on. We looked at some case studies, some locational characteristics that are going to drive this change, and Rick has done some really fascinating analysis as to what parts of the city and how these can actually come together within a community.
So we started modeling the spatial impacts of autonomy about a year and a half ago. And like we mentioned earlier, we were initially way too conservative. And that's just the nature of modeling anyways. You start out conservative and then you work from there. But we have revised the models 3 times already in about a year. And so we were wildly too conservative at the beginning. And what we want to figure out is, okay, where are the areas that are most vulnerable? And by vulnerability, we mean really opportunity sites for redevelopment. So we're going to go through a couple case study examples. And since we're in Franklin County, Ohio, that's what we're going to show you first. So this is looking at residential development. And so the reds and the oranges on the map, that indicates the most vulnerable areas. So that's looking at things like population density, the year built, traffic counts, stuff like that. It's a fairly simple model, and it could be made more complex. But as you can see here in Columbus, the areas generally most vulnerable are on the periphery of the core city and the suburbs, and it's really no surprise. But it is, it's still rather shocking. Now, residential vulnerability is different from commercial vulnerability, and we'll get into that. But we want to show you an example of what we're looking at here. So we just chose an area at random based on the results of the GIS exercise, and we can zoom in here to see what that really looks like. And that's what it looks like. And so I'm sure you're all familiar with this development pattern, but these are the areas that are the most vulnerable. When we look at commercial vulnerability, we think this is really the thing that we need to be paying attention to right now, because of the convergence with the retail brick and mortar environment and the rapidly increasing adoption of autonomy. We think that the short-term to mid-term opportunities primarily exist in commercial redevelopment. So again, the oranges indicate the areas that are most likely to be vulnerable, and we can isolate them here. They're not nearly as pervasive as the residential, but the opportunities are a little bit greater, primarily because these structures weren't built to last. They're generally owned by one or just a handful of owners, and frankly, we have a lot that are capable of being redeveloped today. So we did the same thing. We picked an area at random here, and we decided to zoom in on it and see what it looks like, and that's what it looks like. It looks a heck of a lot like the example that Justin just provided. So we also wanted to do it for an area that is expansive and sprawling as the Atlanta region. So this represents 5 counties. This is looking at the residential, and the residential takes up a tremendous amount of area. Again, this probably isn't a short-term opportunity. It's more of a mid to a long-term play, but it is just amazingly pervasive throughout Atlanta. In fact, it's the predominant development type, is the areas that are vulnerable. Again, just chose an area at random. I don't know Atlanta all that well, so I just decided to circle this area on the map and zoom in on it.
Is it different than the first one?
It doesn't look a whole lot different. It's actually much less dense, though, than it is here in Columbus. Atlanta is kind of shockingly not dense.
And we don't know what is going to happen with these, but we know that there will be a significant change in the way people are choosing where to live. And I think the important thing to think about is that the physical environment can change very significantly based on the fact that the choices made for mobility will be different. And what we're seeing is in a more traditional grid pattern, more urban characteristics, the behavior may change, the densities may grow, but the actual physical structure of the way that areas function probably will be relatively similar. These areas are kind of up for grabs, so it's really a wild card as to what could be the next phase of life for all these really suburban and ex-urban type developments.
So just like Columbus, we did the commercial analysis for Atlanta, and similar to Columbus, it is not nearly as pervasive as the residential, but Atlanta is a much larger area, so consequently there's more area affected here. So we did the same thing, just chose an area at random and zeroed in on it, and voila, there you go. You know, the majority of what we're looking at here is consumed by parking. So the commercial opportunities for vulnerability, depending on your perspective, these are things that are staring us in the face right now. I just concluded a plan where we were looking at, the commercial environment in a revitalization district, and this subject came up because, we're planning for 20, 30 years down the road, and we already have too much parking and a lot of wasted space, so it would be negligent for us not to make considerations for the advancement of this technology and its impact on the commercial environment.
So those are sort of initial looks at a couple specific cities in the United States. One thing we're doing as part of this research group is expanding our research to try to understand how these impacts are having regional and national implications. And that's sort of one of the things we're going to be going through and identifying further factors that may lead both to vulnerabilities and opportunities as we go forward. What we want to touch on for just a little while here before we explain what we think planners need to be doing are what are the other things that are going to happen. And we get a lot of questions, and what we try to do is list some of those out and explain to you that in most cases, no one is really sure yet, but there's certainly things we all need to be working about. One of the first things that's incredibly important to understand is that we need to get away from our concept of what a car has been for all these years. And frankly, what a truck has been and what a bus has been. Autonomous vehicles, we've talked a lot about today, related to individual driverless cars. But autonomous vehicles really account for any kind of vehicle that would be driving on its own and being able to be summoned and optimized the way that it moves around. So a lot of these quote-unquote cars will no longer be what we think of as cars. The fact that a lot of us carry things around in our trunks for the entire year that we may use 1 or 2 days a year, that probably will shift. And instead of what we have now is we'll start to have on-demand mobility for perhaps much smaller vehicles, shared vehicles that will have multi-seats. And what this enables us to do is get a lot more efficiency. The other thing is that it seems very clear that just electric cars are the way that many of these vehicles will function. Again, calling them cars is probably not the right thing. Internal combustion engine technology is, I'm not saying going to be extinct, but it's certainly going to be highly supplanted by the way the technology is heading. And I know we've all heard it before, electric cars will never happen. Well, it is really moving in that direction. All the major manufacturers are making that investment. A number of billion-dollar factories, and certainly not in the least driven by Tesla's efforts to make more efficient and cheaper batteries. And all the other manufacturers are headed to that as at least a potential for these kind of vehicles.
And a lot of the range anxiety that you get with electric cars now goes away with autonomous vehicles when you think of it as a system, because all of a sudden that car can go charge itself, you can pick another one up, go where you need to. It's using a system, using the mobility rather than being stranded with the car that you own that's out of batteries.
And these may be small shuttles that are efficiently moving people around. One of the things we're going to show you here is a research project that was done that took all of the cab trips in Manhattan and modeled what would happen if there was an on-demand shared vehicle system with 10 and then with 4 vehicles. And again, I'm not going to try and explain every aspect of this. Certainly, I would encourage you to take a look at it online. Some MIT researchers, along with, I'm sorry, another university that slips my mind right now. But what they found is that you could actually get a much greater efficiency and way fewer actual vehicles on the road by having shared vehicles that were on demand. So it was actually upwards of 75% plus reduction in the number of actual vehicles that would be needed if there was a shared model that was taking place with people getting picked up in the same spot and dropped off at the same spot, but actually being able to have that on-demand pooled and shared vehicle service. And so what does that mean? Well, initially we're still going to have regular cars that will be in effect. There are a number of companies now that are competing to be able to have very affordable technologies to retrofit people's cars, but I personally don't think that's going to be a major market. I think what you're going to see is maybe some retrofits on cars that are partially autonomous. One of the things to think about, Rick mentioned it earlier, we're already buying partially autonomous vehicles. We only have 3 things that we do when we're driving. We're accelerating, we're braking, we're steering. And any of you who have been paying attention to car commercials or car shopping over the last 2 years have noticed how many more advertised functions are going into cars to control those systems. The most notable of which is autonomous front braking. And not this last Super Bowl, but the one before that, as what we think was the first example of a commercial that actually used that term, and that was Volkswagen. And since then, all the car manufacturers have now introduced that as a coming technology in their vehicles, as well as lane assist and self-parking. These are all aspects of autonomy. It's just about tying those together. So what you might see, maybe a traditional vehicle, maybe you'll own your own vehicle, especially if you're in a more exurban area, but that will be a shared family vehicle that will be able to drop off and pick up folks. So instead of sitting idle 95% of the time, maybe it only sits idle 80% of the time or 65% of the time. And then, of course, shared autonomous vehicles where that vehicle would pick up a whole bunch of different people at different times like Uber. But then the final aspect of that is pooled shared autonomous. And that is where we can potentially see a pretty big transformation in things like transit, because that's when we can maximize the number of trips, like was shown in that research example, having fewer vehicles and getting the same efficiency of the trips, because we have a giant network that's actually picking people up at the most efficient time and the most efficient way and dropping them off. And as we talked about before, this can lead to dramatically reduced insurance costs, dramatically reduced overall mobility costs, and the opportunity to kind of choose where you live without having to worry about where you're going to park and that kind of thing. This is that report that Rick just alluded to, and this is a pretty remarkable report by this Rethink X group, and we'd encourage you to look it up online. But they're actually thinking that the speed of a shared model, which is what they're calling the TaaS, is going to happen a lot faster. And by their estimations, by the year 2030, virtually everybody will be using a shared model. Is that right? We don't know. But we certainly, as planners, have to be thinking that this is going to be a huge likelihood that the shared model will become prevalent, which will dramatically lower the need to have parking. And one other thing we should mention, even if people are still driving or riding their own autonomous vehicles, if you have an urban corridor or a town square or a shopping district or a retail or an entertainment center right now in your city that's really challenged on parking, as soon as those cars can go park themselves, all that challenge goes away. Because even if you don't believe everybody's going to share cars, and even if you don't believe individual ownership is going to go away, once people have autonomous cars that can park themselves, they will get dropped off at the front door of the restaurant and the car could go a mile or two away to park somewhere else. So suddenly a lot of these typical planning problems that we thought were sort of unbeatable go away.
There's one thing I want to bring up. For anybody that is on the line and kind of rolling their eyes at the things that we're saying, I would strongly encourage you to Google Rethink X. They have a report that came out about less than a week ago. It's one of the best kind of compendiums of knowledge that we found on the subject. It's really well researched. They did an excellent job on it, and that's something that I would encourage you to go look.
Highly aggressive.
Highly aggressive. So what happens with trucking? We've been talking a lot about development patterns and about specific kind of fun planner stuff. But trucking is an industry that is right now, I know, in the need for drivers, but it's something that is fairly easy to automate in some ways. They typically travel on freeways that are consistent state to state. They're well marked. They're well maintained. And if you think about the economic impetus for really pushing toward automation, this is probably one of the first places that you're going to see it. Think for a moment if you had a professional truck driver in the first truck and you had two kind of drone trucks following behind. All of a sudden you've eliminated the need for two truck drivers, or you've tripled the capacity that you have per truck driver. Two different ways to look at it. But again, this is going to be something that's really pushing towards the continuing automation that we're expecting. Testing is also underway throughout the U.S. and worldwide. I know here in Columbus in the 33 corridor, there's a grant that was given to the city rather, where they're testing autonomous trucks between the city of Dublin and then Honda of Marysville, going back and forth between those, and I believe the Limited and Rickenbacker Airport. So this is something that here in our immediate vicinity we're expecting to see on the road very, very, very soon. This is an example of some of the benefits of that, not necessarily in terms of driving cost of the driver, but just in terms of aerodynamics. If you have these trucks following 6 inches behind, you're going to reduce a lot of drag. You're going to have the ability to have the second truck stop the instant the first truck does. So it can follow behind almost like a train, which is a pretty fun way to look at it. What about sprawl? This is a question that we always get. It's a question we don't necessarily have an answer for. there is a chance that AV adoption will encourage sprawl. In one sense, it now allows development to a density that we haven't seen in a lot of places. On the other sense, it really takes away a lot of the cost of driving. So the second somebody puts a bar in one of these, imagine that you can now relax on your way home from work with a cocktail in hand, or actually do work on the way home. So now an hour commute outside the city, first of all, it might not take an hour, but secondly, might not be an hour of paying attention driving. So it's taking a lot of the cost away from that. So there is a chance that we could see both urban areas become denser, but we could also see suburban areas tend to get a lot more sprawled out.
Yeah, on the other hand, if we suddenly have an immense amount of developable ground that used to be parking around our outer belts, it's a pretty good chance that developers are going to look for the easiest and least expensive ground to redevelop, and that may actually have an influence to make greenfield sites less compelling, because right now they're great. They're in single large ownership. They are pretty easy to develop technically. That same sort of scenario is going to be these large retail sites that become obsolete around freeway exits. So again, we don't know. It could push and pull in either direction. And will traffic get better or worse? We have read a lot of articles on this, and happen to be at a transportation engineering firm as well. And there are some folks who have predicted that the amount of extra trips that will be generated will be so many that it will actually overburden the capacity of our roadway system. There are some that have predicted that the efficiencies that can be gained in the existing roadway system will eliminate all traffic problems whatsoever. But since we're all pragmatic planners, I think we have taken the approach that I'm guessing probably a lot of you have, that it's probably going to be somewhere in between. Some things are going to get a lot more efficient and work a lot better. Other things are not going to work as well. And it's up to us to help the engineering community identify what that can be. One of the most important things is to start to prioritize how we're spending our money. So in areas where great efficiencies can be gained, we should not be building excess capacity now with the thought that our same model is going to keep running as it always has. And at the same time, we have to think about creating great places where people want to end up, and that's going to drive where they're going more so than the exact number of minutes it takes to get there, which is one of the fundamental aspects of how we make locational decisions now.
And autonomy is going to allow for something that we currently only see in a handful of service-based transportation options. Autonomy is the perfect platform for something like congestion pricing. So we know for a fact that we can change human behavior by rewarding them with money. So imagine applying congestion pricing to an autonomy model, and now that can be considered the great equalizer. In addition to the fact that we can squeeze more cars in a smaller amount of space, now we can change the time of those trips based on the economic incentives.
Here's an example. This is a study that was done by MIT. We talked a little bit about public transit and infrastructure. This is a single intersection, and this is the function of a single intersection right now. In a fully autonomous and optimized system, the rules of the game change in a lot of ways. All of a sudden, the cars are now spaced at an increment where they can facilitate a stream of traffic going through them. This has some pretty fundamental consequences for a lot of things that we do right now. So for the freeways, we build million-dollar bridges, tens of million-dollar bridges, just to cross over another stream of traffic. Well, that might not be necessary anymore. These things could travel in platoons, basically discrete packets, almost like information running through the internet, and allows a lot more flexibility with how intersections can work. A lot of this has to do with the infrastructure that could be available potentially in what they call vehicle-to-infrastructure communication. Ideas that still have to be fleshed out in a lot of ways, but again, it's a huge opportunity for how the cities function and how these things can be built.
But then, of course, what happens about pedestrians and bikers? And this is a thing where I think as planners, we really have to lead the way to make sure these interests are represented in the way that these new intersections are going to function. As Justin mentioned, these cars could be platooned and packeted, but we don't know exactly what that means if you get to certain intersections that start to eliminate signalization. And sure, we're like, well, that's way down the road. Well, it's not really, because think about when we're doing infrastructure projects. We're building these projects not for the next 2 to 3 years. We're building them with these traffic counts and these estimates of future growth that are typically 10, 15, 20 to 30 years in the future. We have to be thinking about now how we are going to be adapting some of these intersections and the ways that humans move through these intersections. Right now, it's acknowledged bikes are the toughest problems for autonomous vehicles because they are relatively quick and they can move unpredictably and they're hard to spot. So these are all things that we're going to have to figure out as this technology continues to improve.
One of the fun things to think about pedestrian access is you could have a situation where somebody hits a crosswalk and a fully optimized system, traffic is vacated from the street. Basically, you can cross from any point in the street, which is kind of fun to think about.
Yeah.
You think about a full system, there's a lot of opportunities there to really change how the way people interact with the built environment.
Absolutely. And then what about transit? It's our feeling that this could be a huge boon to transit. There could be different ways that transit systems work. I think any of us who are in a city that has a bus system are familiar that a lot of time, unfortunately, a lot of the buses are traveling around without full loads and with only, half to fewer people. That's highly inefficient, and it means that we can only have so many routes because we only have so much money. This system can allow us to maximize and adapt the number and size of vehicles in an on-demand situation that can immediately react to the situation wherever it is. And in a lot of systems, in mid-size or smaller-sized cities, that may eliminate routes altogether. Now, what does that mean for fixed asset transit? We think it could be a huge boon, where you can hit one button and a vehicle will pick you up and drop you off right at, say, the train station that takes you in between two different cities, or the subway station that takes you throughout your community. So I think that the difficulty of mode shift that we all talk about, when we have to make the decision to, I'm going to ride my bike there, then I'm going to buy a bus ticket. That goes away when it's a one-button click that tells you how you're going to get there. Sure, you might have to step off of this vehicle and get on another one, but anybody who's become accustomed to riding subways or other big transit systems in major metros is used to that transfer. And that's a lot easier than thinking about driving your car, parking it, getting into a bus, and those aspects. And then the other thing that's really exciting about this is how we can serve a bunch of other populations. We could much more humanely and efficiently serve populations that are completely dependent on public transit, especially in communities where we don't have a very good system right now, and people have to stand out at a freezing cold bus stop and wait and hope that the route goes close enough to where they need to shop or get medical attention. This could allow a situation where obviously it would take some sort of a larger program, but where the local transit agency or the Health and Human Services or whomever it is in that local area provides credits where people can then take door-to-door service, and all of a sudden we can envision a situation where medical care is much more accessible, food deserts are not as much of a challenge, and a lot of these problems that we're facing daily as planners could be highly alleviated, maybe not completely alleviated, but certainly made to be a little bit easier to deal with.
What could change in neighborhoods? Neighborhoods are a big question. Main streets could potentially get better in a lot of ways. So again, they're unconstrained by parking. We do a lot of work in historic downtowns, and what you see, at least in the Ohio towns, is that you have a historic core, and a lot of the buildings were raised, and you almost have a donut of parking all the way around. There's now an opportunity to try and stitch back some of the urbanism that we had in the past, back to the neighborhoods that are surrounding downtown. Parking is not going to be a driver for these places, which is really great. It's going to be a boon for a lot of the historic downtowns that we have, because all of a sudden we don't have to build parking decks. We don't have to accommodate cars in the same way that we did before. Another sense, if you take a look at, say, even parking in terms of on-street parking. So right now, if you have a two-way street, you might have on-street parking on both sides. You're looking at 16 feet of width that's dedicated toward just car storage. If parking is no longer an issue, what happens to those places? How is that really transformed into something that could be a benefit? Right now in Columbus, we have a program called Blueprint, which is striving to mitigate a lot of the stormwater issues that we have and try and redirect that into groundwater. This could be a really good opportunity to do that, because potentially you have 8 feet now of pavement that could be turned into pervious surface, hopefully addressing a lot of the stormwater issues that you have in a lot of places.
So that's sort of an overview of a lot of the questions that we know are percolating around our brains, and we think as a profession we have the responsibility and the opportunity to figure out over the coming decades. But what we want to challenge you with are some things that we think that you need to start doing right away. And as Rick said, sometimes you will get some eye rolls. And believe me, I've heard all the terms, oh, that's the Jetsons, that's this, that's that. I can tell you with every passing month that we've been doing this over the last couple of years, that skepticism has gotten less and less. and the enthusiasm has gone up remarkably. Not in the small part due to the advances of Tesla and the testing of Uber in different regions throughout the country, where people now know that there are actual autonomous vehicles that are sharing the roads with them. So again, I'm not going to go through all of these elements, but we do think that you really should expect a relatively aggressive timeline. And we are thinking, even within the next 1 to 3 years, there will be limited adoption. Now, granted, this will likely be higher cost vehicles like Teslas, and I know they're trying to generate a much more affordable version. And we don't really have the regulations in place. But based on the things that we have been researching and reading, we think it is not unlikely that within 3 to 7 years, you could see what we're calling moderate adoption, which means that it will not be surprising to see driverless vehicles on the road. A lot more people will start to buy them. Infrastructure will start to change. And significantly, the shared model will start to emerge more significantly. Here in Columbus and a lot of cities, there are shared individual car models that are sort of that driver rental model, like a car-to-go or a zip car. Those are all contemplating how they're going to fit into this model. Certainly the Ubers and Lyfts, many companies are contemplating how to get into that space that they are sort of monopolizing right now. And that shared model will become more and more prevalent, and infrastructure will add. And then within 5 to 15 years is when we, or 7 to 15 years, I'm sorry, is where we really see an incredibly high adoption rate. So within 15 years, we think that most people will be in autonomous vehicles. Shared model will be fairly dominant, and infrastructure will really be changing with then full adoption coming after that. What does that mean for us as planners? Well, that means as site impacts are changing, we need to think about land use. We need to think about the way people are making these decisions. And Justin's going to go through some very specific recommendations. But think about, like, right now, 1 to 3 years, sure, the sites are probably going to be pretty similar. But if we're planning for new sites, we got to think about what's happening in this 3 to 7, 7 to 15 plus years. All of a sudden, starting 3 years from now, parking needs probably will start to get reduced. And we're going to have to think about the ways that buildings will be different. Because if everyone wants to arrive at a store or an entertainment district or a movie theater or whatever, a hospital, and they all want to get dropped off at the front door, that means we have to have a different style of architecture and a different style of approach for the site. All of a sudden, these parking spaces become less relevant than drop-off zones. So how do we work with our development applications? How do we work with architects? How do we work with engineers? And then again, that continues to evolve until the point where 15 plus years from now, we may not need actual on-site parking at all. It might be a whole different element, which is a loading zone or a drop-off zone, which requires different code standards, different regulations, and different review knowledge and experience.
So here's the questions. What should planners do now? I think the first part is to include AV technology in the processes. The very first thing you can do is to start the conversation in the communities that you work in and work with. It's still something that we even have trouble in our professional lives bringing up to clients, just because it's still something that not a lot of people can fully understand what the potential is. We need to mandate code changes. Require that all parking garages be adaptable to other uses. The last thing you want is large liabilities in terms of parking garages, empty parking garages that now the city's responsible to take down.
And some communities are doing this. Downtown Denver has started this, for instance, so this isn't unprecedented. There are communities that are starting to require this.
So what that means is adequate floor-to-ceiling height, and you can do that by bumping up the floor-to-ceiling height and then supplementing with a lift so you can still get the same amount of cars. And no ramped floor plates. Again, it's really hard to do residential on an incline or a slope. And then reduce parking requirements. Anticipate triggers in AV adoption that can lower or abandon parking minimums. We need to focus on place. The impact on commercial development is going to be felt the earliest, and it's our guess the places that actually have a sense of place, that cater to the individual, that cater to the pedestrian, are the ones that are going to benefit the most from this type of technology. Again, we don't have to accommodate cars, so it's not a matter of pulling out our development pattern to such an extent. Now we can really densify and we can create that sense of place that we all know that most people like to be in. We need to create overlays. So corridors with the never going to leave uses like car lots, gas station, etc. Well, those are going to be obsolete. I don't think there's a doubt in anyone's mind, in this room at least, that those are uses that are going to be around for a long time. That's something that has to be really considered right now. Requirements and strategies for redevelopment of corner lots, and again, all the automobile-oriented uses that we have, and even the land use decisions and the land use patterns that we have around those automobile corridors. We need to advocate to your local elected officials and boards and staff provide information to the council, to the planning commission, advocate for the city engineer and transportation to consider the coming of AV technology. Not everybody is aware of this. People see it. They see it as a kind of a thing that's happening in the background, but they don't understand it's a bomb that's about to go off and everything that we understand about city planning and development. We need to identify areas of your community that are most susceptible to change. And Rick went through and I went through a couple of examples of those, but new opportunities for success and the potential areas of failure. How do we avoid failure and how do we really promote success as this new technology starts coming to market? And we need to find new land use strategies for your community. So what do you do with the excess retail ground? What do you do with the excess parking garage? What do you do with the excess corner lots? Again, these uses were built around a very specific development pattern that had a very specific auto-oriented system at the heart of it, and that's all going to be gone. And we really have to rethink the last 70 years and how we can do things differently that really benefit people, benefit places, and move our communities into the direction that we really want. So with that, I'll turn it over to questions. Again, my name is Justin Robbins, OHM Advisors.
And I'm Rick Stein from Urban Decision Group.
And I'm Jason City with OHM Advisors as well.
So I think that our moderator has now the ability to pop us up with questions. So.
Wonderful. Yeah,
okay.
We have questions. So let's get started. The first one is, first and foremost, could you please repeat the Google search term that you want everyone to go to?
Yeah, probably easiest if we could include a list.
Yeah, we could. Would there be a way to actually put out that link to the group that's listening today?
Well, if you want to, why don't you add it to the PowerPoint, and then when you send it to me, I'll post it on there.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably going to be the easiest thing to do.
Okay.
Again, get a hold of it and read as much of it as you can. It's mind-blowing. It's really exciting stuff.
Cool. Okay, so after that, given the extensive economic interests of the auto industry, insurance industry, oil industry, auto finance industry, are there concerns that political pressure will come into play to slow or eliminate the autonomous vehicle movement?
It's probably too late. There's so much money invested. We actually, the big auto manufacturers, every single one of them are already pushing in this direction and announcing that this is the way that they are going to move into the future. And what they're doing is anticipating, instead of as many cars, fewer number that they have to replace a lot more often.
Yeah, so all those are, rather large industries, and believe it or not, most of those industry leaders are at the forefront of taking this into consideration. They are preparing for this scenario. We have firsthand knowledge of the insurance industry and the auto industry itself reacting to this. We also know the petroleum industry has expanded their focus, and you even see it in their television commercials. This is clearly going towards electricity, electric-based cars. So even, the traditional oil companies are trying to diversify and set up these other relationships. So while I see, I could envision, some pushback, but these same players are investing a tremendous amount of money, and generally in America, it's these larger companies that tend to get their way, and they're actually lobbying on the side of autonomy.
There's an interesting thing you can look at as well. At the turn of the century, I think 40% of our workforce from 1899 to 1900 was engaged in the production of food, of agriculture. Now I think it's down to about 2%, and that's basically because of automation in a lot of ways. Not in the same way that we're talking about, but mechanization, I should say. Those people didn't just vanish. They had to find new careers and new jobs. And my guess is probably the big political push is when you have major disruptions in job markets and you have a lot of people that are going to be out of work, hopefully that there's a smooth transition for them to find other opportunities within our new system to make a living. And I think that's something that's even outside of autonomous vehicles. That's something that we as a society are really going to have to deal with over the next probably 30 years, because automation is something that's much larger than the vehicle part of it. There's a report done by McKinsey that I would encourage you to look up as well that really traces which job sectors are the most at risk for automation, and there's a lot. Yeah, a lot of employment base. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, and actually there are quite a few other questions regarding just employment and technology and workforce development. And a lot of communities have put a lot of time and interest in their workforce development just for it potentially to poof, disappear, and all of a sudden it's all about the technology sector. And we don't need a trucker. We need someone who's good with computers who can get to the truck that's on the side of the road and type a bunch of things up and get it back up on the road. So can you just talk a little bit more about that, where things are headed in terms of that?
Well, since we've started doing some permutation of this presentation, some of the first questions we ever got were about economic impact on the workforce. And so, we knew we needed to spend a little bit more time, addressing this subject matter. But we already kind of know what to expect. Some estimates put the loss of manufacturing jobs in the U.S. since 1970, 90% of the losses are due to autonomy and not necessarily outsourcing, as you may have heard recently. So we've got evidence of what the impacts are. It's, how good are we at reacting to that? And, I don't know. I guess the jury's kind of out. It depends on where you live, really. What the evidence is as to how well we've reacted to these changes. So the impact of autonomy on, automated vehicles and just robotics and other occupations, it's going to be more significant than the impact of autonomy on manufacturing, because there's more of these other jobs. And it's going to happen at a quicker pace. So if you think in the last 45 years, it's been kind of a slow walk up to it. Well, it's going to accelerate beyond that.
Yeah, and I highly encourage you, if you're in front of a computer right now, Google McKinsey Global Institute Autonomy. The first thing that pops up if you do that. I just actually did it earlier today. And they have a report you can download. It's a full report, and they have an executive summary, and they've got a really cool online interactive tool. But if you have any concerns about the way your workforce is going to change, your concerns are probably going to be highly exacerbated by that report. They are not a radical group. They're a group that does very extensive economic research, and they show that there are huge numbers of jobs that are likely to be hugely automated. So as Rick said, what autonomous vehicles are a part of this bigger move to autonomy, but certainly if you're doing workforce development, you've got to be considering the autonomous aspects. And if you just happen to be in a region of the country or an area where transportation, whether that be trucking, whether that be auto manufacturer, car manufacturer, truck manufacturer, is a huge part of your economy, then you're going to have some huge shifts. On the other hand, if you are in an area where mobility is huge, some of those shifts may actually be to your mid and long-term benefit. We do a decent amount of work in Southeast Michigan area, and there are now over a dozen test tracks up there, and all of the major manufacturers are moving into this space, and a lot of the technology companies are either relocating or locating offices in that area, as well as nearby areas in the Midwest like Pittsburgh. These are places that were heavily industrial and focused on different aspects of transportation and manufacturing. They're reacting first, and in their reactions, they're going to be the ones that benefit by the shifting economy. Those who don't react are really going to be in trouble, just as we've seen with certain industries in certain places throughout the country that relied on one certain industry or another that just didn't translate into modern society. So it's not a very happy answer, but unfortunately it's the true answer. But I highly encourage you, McKinsey Global Institute Autonomy Report. It's pretty fascinating.
These are good questions. Usually we get a lot about transit and
yeah, they're interesting.
Rural areas.
Yeah.
Next question, and I'm glad this one came up because I was going to ask it if no one else did. I love to drive. I love to drive a manual vehicle. I like cars. I like classic cars. How's this going to play out in the future for this gigantic industry of car lovers?
Turn of the century, people really loved their horses, and it was a living animal that probably had a name. My guess is once transportation becomes cheap enough, the move to a different technology is going to take over. People love driving, but I think they love being entertained even more in terms of this thing could have cars, they could have a bar in it. They could have, you can look at your phone while you do it. Everything that people really love to do. Driving is something that I don't think will ever go away, just like horse ownership never goes away. And I'm not speaking tongue in cheek, but if you look at rural areas, these are the places that tend to have still a lot of horses. If you look at wealthy people, they're the ones that still have horses. They're the ones that still race horses for sport. Driving could be in the same realm as that, relegated not necessarily only, but primarily in rural areas, something that's still done by sport, or something that's still done by recreation. So I don't think it'll entirely go away, but I think that all in all, by and large, the type of driving that people do day to day is fairly mundane. It's getting to and from place to place. And it's very, very rare that you have the top down with your hair blowing in the wind going through a test track from a automobile commercial. So I still think that will be available, but I don't think it'll be the norm like it's not now.
Yeah, and think of the example I use is think of Times Square. You might hate Times Square, but a lot of the country thinks Times Square is pretty awesome. And the reason is because there's a lot of flashing lights and there's all kinds of things to do and it's entertainment thrown in your face. Don't underestimate the power to monetize all of these vehicles. When you're the grandparent that's out wherever you're living and you want to see your grandkids, in the future, you're going to be able to reserve the Disney automated branded car or the Nickelodeon branded car or the dinosaur branded car or whatever it is to go get your niece or nephew or grandkid to bring them to your house, because all of this stuff is going to be intensely branded, advertised, entertainment focused. I wouldn't be surprised if major studios, movie studios, and entertainment channels have their own agreements with different fleets where, you get in a car and you've got I'm in an NBC car, I guess I'll be watching Jimmy Fallon clips, just like you do in taxis now, and you can't turn that damn thing off in there either. So I think that it's generational. And I do think it's generational. I think that a kid who's 5 or 10 now is going to grow up with a very different attitude toward cars, and somebody who's not even born yet, it won't even occur to them.
Well, I've got 2 teenage children, and they couldn't care less about driving. Their friends don't care about driving. So that's the opinion of that generation that's coming up. Now, my parents are in their 70s. They grew up around the 57 Chevy. That was a big deal. They are very much car people. But there is a big generational piece of this. And so while I think for some time the 2 types will exist along the same road, but it's not that hard to envision, the preference for autonomy exceeding the preference for manually driving, and then factor in something like incentives, insurance-based incentives and liability. And it's kind of a recipe for, kind of the beginning of the end for manual driving.
Okay.
So that's our answer.
So, it's good. I mean, I get it. So what's going on across the pond? What's happening in other countries? Where are we compared to technology elsewhere?
Yeah, good question. We're hanging in there. There's a lot of work that's being done in Europe. Mercedes is one of the leaders in this technology field. They've really pioneered a lot of the work on autonomous or platoon trucking, autonomous vehicles on highways. Not surprisingly, German highways and German automobiles, they're kind of advanced in certain aspects in that regard.
Their cars don't have speed limits.
They don't have speed limits. Pretty much every single major manufacturer is invested in this. Nissan has announced that there will be cars coming to market along with Ford just within the next couple of years. Toyota and Honda were a little slower to get into the market. Now they're really participating in a big way. We have a test track here in Central Ohio that is a combination of Ohio State and Honda. They're working on very hard. Audi, again, a German company, they have been pushing very hard, Volkswagen, but they've been pushing very hard on what they're calling the hive mentality, which is their sort of version of this interlearning of different vehicles. As far as implementation goes, there's been a lot of places that have implemented those small sort of 5 to 10 person vehicles that we showed you a few of. Dubai actually has a very high aggressive approach where they have a little bit different governmental structure where things can just be determined without as much political wrangling as we have here. So they're anticipating that they're going to have between 25 and 30% of all their chips be autonomous by the year 2025. And they already are developing systems And people I know have been over there and have seen where there are different autonomous vehicles that are smaller pods that go in and out of individual buildings throughout England, throughout the Netherlands, throughout Greece. They're all testing those pod shuttle systems. So yeah, I mean, we're hanging in there. I think from a regulatory standpoint, we're a little bit maybe ahead on developing a legal infrastructure that allows these to be on public right-of-ways, but we're probably a little bit behind on some of the group and shared pool testing. I do think, though, the advantage we do have is that we've got Uber, we've got Google, and a lot of the major companies are focused here from the technology standpoint. Not all, some are elsewhere. Mobileye is a huge company out of Israel, and they just were acquired for several $1 billion by one of the big car manufacturers. So that's just sort of a quick overview.
I also think it's interesting to look at what's going on in countries like China and India. India just recently totally revamped their transportation policy. They are going all in on electric vehicles, and they're doing it for two reasons. One is the emissions issue, and the other is actually a reaction to China. You know, they're trying to compete with China. But what that's one of the positive externalities of this shift in policy is they're actually building an infrastructure that's easily adoptable to autonomy. And so China, in reaction to what's taken place in India, China had put a tremendous amount of their resources and policy initiatives towards hybrid. China's rethinking this entire thing and trying to skip ahead of India, and so the anticipation is China is going to change to an all-electric strategy also, but explicitly state the intention is to go to full autonomy and beat India to the market. So it's kind of fascinating to watch this play out. It is worth noting in countries that are not democracies, it's much easier to push a policy agenda. You know, so, you know, you just issue an edict and so be it. You know, here in America, we are a democracy, and so, you know, policy changes tend to take a little bit more time and go through the legislative process. But yeah, keep an eye on what's going on in China, India, and, you know, don't snooze on Japan, because they stand to gain by quite a lot also.
So you threw me a softball. What does the current administration say about autonomous vehicles, if anything, and do you think that they will be supportive of this industry?
Well, there hasn't been a whole lot said, but I will say this: it is. I think I'm probably going to get in trouble if I try to read tea leaves, but I think the economic pressures may help dictate policy, and so I'm talking corporate pressure. That's probably my clearest read on this. It is, you know, it is a newer technology. Yeah, and I will I'll relay an anecdote from I was at a Ford event at the North American International Auto Show back in January, and on day one of the event, the focus was entirely on autonomous technology, and surprisingly, the impact on cities. So it wasn't just Ford rolling out a bunch of autonomous cars. There was an awful lot of discussion on autonomy. And so as part of the event, there was a series of TED Talks. And so we got to listen to folks like Walter Isaacson from the Aspen Institute, and Jeff Speck was there. And they discussed, you know, these policy initiatives. And there was a gentleman by the name of Jeremy Rifkin, and he's written a book called The Third Industrial Revolution. And he is hopeful that the U.S. will start investing in these next generation technologies. And so he does an awful lot of consulting work in Europe. And his position is, so he is an economist. His position is, one of the reasons that our economy is not growing at the rate that we would like it to is because we continue to invest in these older technologies, these second industrial revolution technologies, and there's no more efficiencies to be squeezed out of them. In Europe, in Germany, the Netherlands, some countries where they're clearly investing in things like renewable energy, autonomy and transportation, more robust communication systems, focusing on, high-speed broadband internet. The economy can grow quicker because it's not nearly as efficient. Initially, when you're investing in these new technologies, you have to throw more resources at it, and that's inherently inefficient. But you're throwing capital, you're throwing resources at it, so that in turn grows the economy. So that's my little plug for making these sorts of investments, because I think if we would do it, I think we would see the economy grow at the rate that we would like it to. But there are no initial indications that this administration is looking at this positively or negatively.
They seem busy with other things right now.
Okay, well, I think we're going to go ahead and just wrap up. There's still a ton of questions, and I know we couldn't get through them all, but all that really means is this is a hot topic, and we're not done talking about it. If anyone has any direct questions, you can feel free to email our speakers, and hopefully they'll be able to get back to you. And we are recording this, again, just so you know. It will be available on our YouTube channel probably Monday. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. And a PDF will be available probably Monday too on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. So I think that's it, and we'll just wrap up. Thanks to the three of you for coming on today and talking with us. This is clearly an important topic, and it's not going away. So thanks for joining us. And thanks, everyone, for listening.
Yeah, we loved it. We appreciate it a lot. We love being on.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. All right, everyone, have a great weekend.